Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Friday, March 3rd, 2023. If you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's primary online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Hawaii and Alaska to the lower left. If you point and click anywhere on these maps, it'll pull up a forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. There's also additional information you can find on this site. Quick check of the lower 48, pretty active pattern. We have winter storm warnings in the northeast, areas of the lower Great Lakes from southern Michigan into northern Indiana. Severe weather, potential for tornadoes in through eastern Ohio, Tennessee valleys into just the west side of the Appalachians, and then further west, another storm going to produce heavy snowfall across areas of northern California, including the Sierra on up into the Cascades of Oregon. So a very active pattern continues there. And it's going to be an active pattern in areas of the west side of the state this weekend. Windy conditions, stormy west coast, a strong, mild southeast to southerly flow of air will bring snow, blowing snow, blizzard conditions to areas of the west coast this weekend into early next week. Rising water levels because of that push from the stronger south winds could cause ice heaving that could make the shorefast ice break loose and also have some water come through some of those openings. Otherwise, further east, high pressure will build over northwest Canada, and that's going to cause some stronger gap and pass winds tonight into Saturday, especially areas like Thompson Pass and upper areas there above Yakutat. But overall, though, going through the weekend and early next week, temperatures are going to warm along the west coast, especially the southwestern coast, but turn colder across the southeast, especially across the panhandle early next week. We expect below normal temperatures. Now, looking at some of the FAA webcams this afternoon, Savunga, increasing clouds ahead of the approaching storm. Blizzard warnings are in effect for St. Lawrence Island, 11 below this early afternoon, cold temperatures. And then over across the way, Nome, sunny and cold, 17 below. But again, blizzard condition is in effect there for tonight through early Monday morning as this next storm system and the stronger southerly winds will be developing. As we go further east, Thompson Pass around Valdez, high wind watch has been upgraded to a high wind warning. Winds could gust as high as 75 miles an hour from the northeast through Thompson Pass later tonight as that cold air drains through there and the pressure gradient tightens with that building high pressure up in Canada. Ketchikan still have some lingering lighter snow showers. Temperature there this afternoon a little bit above freezing, but temperatures are going to be turning colder over the course of the weekend and early next week across the panhandle, and skies will tend to be clearer with that offshore flow, and we do anticipate at least some drier weather there, but the wetter conditions will be along the west coast. Initially, with that push of warm air coming over the colder air at the surface leads to snow, and there'll be snow and blowing snow blizzard warnings from Point Hope all the way down through Kotzebue, including Kivalina, down to Shishmaref, down through Wales, Teller, Nome, and then out there across Savunga, Gamble there on St. Lawrence Island. Further south and west, the lower Yukon Delta under a winter storm warning. Initially snow and blowing snow that will mix with and change over to some sort of mix of precipitation here as we get into later Saturday or early on Sunday. And then along the east side of Norton Sound, we have a winter weather advisory for Shaktoolik down through Stebbins. Maybe not quite as much precipitation, but still windy conditions. But the bulk of the really blowing, drifting snow blizzard conditions here will be along the coastlines from through the Bering Strait up there through the lower Chukchi Sea. And then we have that high wind warning now for Valdez and especially Thompson Pass for those strong gap winds as the pressure gradient tightens here south of the Alaska Range in response to a building area of high pressure that'll be setting up here later this weekend over northwest Canada. So we had a fabulous display of the northern lights this past Sunday night. There's a possibility of a minor geomagnetic storm getting a glancing blow of a coronal mass ejection here either tonight or Saturday. There's the potential for some active auroras, but not as intense as this past Sunday night. At least that's not what we're thinking. And the approaching full moon is going to wash out any fainter aurora. And the full moon of March is called the Worm Moon, which occurs next week, Tuesday, on March 7th. And this fabulous image here of the northern lights was taken by our very own Brian Brettschneider on Sunday night this past week. While looking at satellite imagery, we have a couple areas of low pressure that are going to be working their way southeastward along the British Columbia coast and weakening. Meanwhile, high pressure will set up and strengthen over the Yukon Northwest Territories, and then out to the west. We have one low that's going to lift out of the North Pacific, another one now riding up along the eastern Russian coast that will continue working its way northeastward. This low will lift up into the central Bering on Saturday. Ahead of it, strong southeast to south winds are going to create the problems there along areas of the west coast. So here comes that warm front. That's what's triggering the snow and blowing snow overnight and into Saturday. And that's the first low. The second low comes on up in through the central Bering tomorrow afternoon with a strong southeast to south flow along the west coast. Again, those blizzard conditions continuing. As warmer air rides farther north, we could see precipitation mix with some rain or a little freezing rain there over areas of the southwest interior. And then finally on Sunday, still snow in the far north, but more of a mix there in the lower Yukon Delta areas. Further south will be predominantly rain, especially across the western half of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. So temperatures tonight below freezing here across the Panhandle, though still near 30 in the south, well below zero. Copper River Basin 16 below Glen Allen. Highs on Saturday could still squeak out mid-30s to near 40 lower Panhandle, but it will be cooling down in the north. Temperatures single digits there as you get into the interior toward the Alaska Range. And then lows Sunday morning still quite cold. Copper River Basin 16 below Glen Allen. And we expect readings across the Panhandle to be below freezing there. And then on Sunday afternoon, daytime highs generally will stay below freezing except for in the far south of the Panhandle at Ketchikan and Craig. Back toward the west, maybe back up around or just above 20 in Anchorage. Far north, this is where the cold air resides. 30s below here in the north slope and widespread sub-zero temperatures. But Saturday afternoon, north of the Yukon River, generally staying below zero. Temperatures will start to moderate around Norton Sound and the Seward Peninsula in response to that strong southeast to south winds. Coldest air shifts over the Yukon, upper Yukon toward Yukon Flats, down toward Eagle and Northway, 20s to near 30 below in some areas. And then we are looking for temperatures to moderate further south and west into the 20s across the Seward Peninsula on Sunday. And then Saturday morning, lows will be near or below zero across the southwest interior. But notice as you go out through the Aleutians, readings there will stay above freezing. Saturday afternoon highs 40s across the Aleutians with that strong southerly flow. Back here, we'll start to see readings getting around or above freezing, maybe as up toward Bethel. And as we go into Sunday morning, temperatures steady to slowly rising Sunday night here in the southwest interior, so that by Sunday afternoon, temperatures could be well into the 30s, even up around 40 degrees, say from Bethel down through King Salmon, and certainly extending out along the Aleutian chain. In fact, it could be temperatures could be up near 50 around Dutch Harbor. So the temperature outlook here as we go through March 9th through the 13th. Initially this weekend, early next week, much above normal temperatures possible in the west. As we go through later next week, we're going to see the continuation of colder temperatures here sitting over the Panhandle. So below to much below normal temperatures possible, especially early to midweek. Further west, initial surge of warmer air, and that could linger in through March 9th and 13th up across the northwest with near normal temperatures from Fairbanks down through Anchorage into the Alaska Peninsula. And that in turn will cause precipitation to average below normal then for a change after this initial surge of warmer air and moisture that hits areas of the southwest and west and northwest coast. We're expecting things to dry out with some ridging here by March 9th through the 13th, and even there along areas of the Panhandle through this especially central Panhandle, we anticipate precipitation to average below normal there for the period March 9th through the 13th.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned this weekend, Saturday or Sunday, a couple of major weather players. One will be a building area of high pressure over northwest Canada, the Yukon Northwest Territories, building to 1050 millibars as we go through the weekend. That's going to turn the Panhandle much colder, but plenty of dry air, a lot of VFR conditions across the interior, eastern mainland, in through the Panhandle. Further west, though, strong southerly flow coming across the eastern half of the Bering Sea, associated with low pressure lifting northward from the North Pacific across the central Aleutians. This system is going to bring widespread IFR conditions across areas of the southwest and west central coast of the mainland, up through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island. Initially as some snow and blowing snow. There are blizzard warnings and winter storm warnings for these areas. And then as we go into Saturday afternoon, that feed of moisture continues out across the Bering and into areas of the west and northwest coast. Snow up here, but further south, as the air is warmer, we will expect a mix of precipitation at times, especially by the time we get into Sunday. Areas Nunavik Island south, westward toward St. Matthew may see mixed precipitation. Still snow, some blowing snow here along the western Seward Peninsula. Widespread clear skies across much of the southern eastern mainland back through the Panhandle. Cold, though, as that high builds. We're going to see some stronger gap winds flowing through the mountains there, coastal mountains there along the Gulf Coast and northern Panhandle. And as we go through Sunday afternoon, widespread IFR conditions from areas of the western Brooks Range, lower Chukchi Sea, Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, all the way down along the YK deltas in through the eastern Aleutians. And keep that in mind, because out that way temperatures will be moderating with much above normal temperatures anticipated early next week along the far western coast. But Anaktuvik Pass to the northeastern Brooks Range this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, VFR. Same thing for Adigan Pass. As we go further south and west along the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR as well. Rounding up to Rainy, Windy, and Isabel passes, VFR conditions are anticipated. The mountains will be visible there. And then further east, maybe a brief period of MVFR early Saturday morning there at Mentasta, giving way to VFR. Further south and west of there, Tanita Pass, VFR conditions, as will Portage Pass see VFR conditions, but there could be some stronger gap winds, not just this Friday, but Saturday through Thompson Pass, areas along the mountains there along the northern and northeastern Gulf Coast, including out of Yakutat and northern Panhandle. And then Chilkoot and White will see VFR conditions on Saturday as well. Freezing levels aloft bump up ahead of a stronger frontal system, a very broad and strong southerly flow across the North Pacific, pushing up into the eastern half of the Bering Sea, and that is going to allow this precipitation to expand out through this area and be mixed at times, especially from areas of the YK Delta off to the west, and then out through areas of the Panhandle, things clearing out. So there could be a little lingering pockets of isolated moderate icing there associated with some rain and snow showers over the southeast Gulf down into the North Pacific, Haida Gwaii southward, but otherwise much of the mainland Panhandle drying out with clear skies. Back to the west, though, as this just broad flow of warm moist air comes up across the Bering Sea into the west side of the state, widespread icing possible above 2,000 feet here through the Bering Strait, where initially it'll be snow. Further south and west, transitions to a mixed precipitation above 5,000 feet, where icing would occur in the cloud layer, and then above 7,000 feet there just north of the central Aleutians. Broad broad ridge of high pressure in the upper atmosphere right here, at least Saturday morning, out over the southwest Alaska Peninsula, but on the backside of it, strong southerly flow is what's going to really allow this moisture transport northward at 700 millibars. Look at these winds, 50 to 80, 85 knots out of the southwest, transporting warmer air northward up toward the Bering Strait. And down at 3,000 feet, we see these winds there anywhere from 50 knots along the southwestern coast to 70 to as high as 85 knots there in through the eastern Aleutians. So strong moisture transport, strong winds. This will lead to widespread areas of considerable moderate turbulence in through the west coast, areas of the central eastern Aleutians, and along the Gulf Coast in association with those gap winds associated with the flow of colder air with the building high pressure over northwest Canada.
Why is plastic marine debris so common? We know there's trash in the ocean. Unfortunately, a lot of it is plastic. We find plastic everywhere, from the ocean floor to surface. The plastics are all shapes and sizes and all different types. We find plastics on beaches and also inside animals' stomachs or wrapped around their bodies. That's bad news for our ocean and the animals that live in it and near it. It's also bad news for us. A recent study from the University of Georgia estimated that 8 million metric tons of plastic trash enters the ocean every year. That's like putting 5 bags filled with plastic on every foot of coastline in the world. That's a lot of plastic in the ocean, and it's there because, well, we put it there. The 5 most common items found during the International Coastal Cleanup are plastic cigarette butts, food wrappers, plastic beverage bottles, plastic bottle caps, and plastic straws and drink stirrers. Notice anything in common with those? It's a lot of single-use, disposable plastic. It goes without saying, we produce too much waste. That waste ends up in the ocean when we litter or don't recycle. Plastic is an important part of our modern lives. We use it for a lot of good things, but we need to take responsibility for how much we use every day and where it goes when we're done with it. The 3 R's can help, and it's up to every single one of us to practice them. Reduce your use of disposable plastic. That's anything you use once and throw away. Just use less. Reuse disposable plastics when possible. A plastic bottle makes a great coin piggy bank or watering can. The possibilities are endless. Recycle anything that can be recycled so it stays out of landfills where trash can blow away. Ocean plastic is a huge problem that's only going to get worse. Unless we change our ways, we can do better for the ocean and for us. Why is plastic marine debris so common? We know there's trash in the ocean. Unfortunately, a lot of it is plastic. We find plastic everywhere, from the ocean floor to surface. The plastics are all shapes and sizes and all different types. We find plastics on beaches and also inside animals' stomachs or wrapped around their bodies. That's bad news for our ocean and the animals that live in it and near it. It's also bad news for us. A recent study from the University of Georgia estimated that 8 million metric tons of plastic trash enters the ocean every year. That's like putting 5 bags filled with plastic on every foot of coastline in the world. That's a lot of plastic in the ocean, and it's there because, well, we put it there. The 5 most common items found during the International Coastal Cleanup are plastic cigarette butts, food wrappers, plastic beverage bottles, plastic bottle caps, and plastic straws and drink stirrers. Notice anything in common with those? It's a lot of single-use, disposable plastic. It goes without saying, we produce too much waste. That waste ends up in the ocean when we litter or don't recycle. Plastic is an important part of our modern lives. We use it for a lot of good things, but we need to take responsibility for how much we use every day and where it goes when we're done with it. The 3 ours can help, and it's up to every single one of us to practice them. Reduce your use of disposable plastic. That's anything you use once and throw away. Just use less. Reuse disposable plastics when possible. A plastic bottle makes a great coin piggy bank or watering can. The possibilities are endless. Recycle anything that can be recycled so it stays out of landfills, where trash can blow away. Ocean plastic is a huge problem that's only going to get worse. Unless we change our ways, we can do better for the ocean and for us.
What is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? Well, first, let's talk about what it's not. It's not a floating island of trash like a garbage dump or a landfill. It's also not the only patch. They exist all throughout the ocean, and the Pacific Garbage Patch just happens to be the most famous. Garbage patches are large areas of marine debris concentration that are formed by rotating ocean currents called gyres, kind of like big whirlpools that suck things in. A garbage patch is made up of tiny plastic pieces called microplastics that are less than 5 millimeters long. It's more like pepper flakes swirling in a soup than something you can skim off the surface. You might come across some larger items like plastic bottles, but it's possible to sail through a garbage patch and not see anything. And they're a big problem for the ocean and us. People often ask why we can't just scoop up all the marine debris in the ocean. And the answer is, unfortunately, it's just not that simple. The first challenge is the sheer size of these garbage patches. They're huge. They're constantly moving with ocean currents. And there's debris from the ocean surface all the way down to the sea floor. Not to mention all the marine life we would disrupt if we tried to just scoop up debris. So what can we do? Well, the ultimate solution is prevention. And we need to keep that as our highest priority. We can reduce, reuse, and recycle to keep trash out of the ocean in the first place. And we can participate in things like shoreline cleanups. It's a lot easier to deal with debris before it gets to the ocean. Because until we stop marine debris at the source, we'll just be cleaning it up forever.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Let's take a look now at the sea ice edge before we get into the marine forecast. The most important thing is we're going to have a strong southeast to south wind flow across the west coast this weekend. And if anything, some of the newly formed ice along this edge here could break up in those gale force winds. Also, the ice may retreat a bit northward here, certainly by later this weekend and early next week. Biggest thing is, though, temperatures are going to be warming above freezing here across the southwest interior as we go through the course of the weekend. Another concern with those stronger winds, especially that southeast component, could pull some of the shorefast ice away, and as a result, that could result in some areas of water coming through where those break-off points happen. But here across the southeast panhandle, winds will be generally out of the north for the inner channels, as high as 30 knots, lower Lynn Canal with waves of 6 feet. Outer coast winds north-northeast 25 to 30 knots, waves generally running 12 to 15 feet. Definitely clearer weather, drier weather as high pressure continues to build over the weekend across areas of northwest Canada. But Sunday, we expect winds to continue out of the north-northwest as high as 25 knots there in through Lynn Canal, maybe downwards to 15 knots there, Ketchikan, with waves of a few feet. Further along the Gulf Coast, notice the offshore flow out of the northeast and north around 20 to 25 knots, and waves anywhere from 6 feet off of Yakutat to 11 feet there off of Craig. For the northwestern Gulf, winds will generally be out of the north-northeast, 25 knots Prince William Sound with 4-foot waves. Upper Cook Inlet, 15-knot northeast winds, but as we get down toward the entrance, 30 to even 40 knots outside of there with waves of 6 to as high as 13 feet northeast of Kodiak. And then on Sunday, things a bit calmer calmer. Variable winds 10 knots off of the Kenai. Look for winds out of the northeast, 10 knots in Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet. And then out of the northeast, 20 knots, especially from Anchor Point down through the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves around 5 feet. Now across Kodiak Island, winds will be turning north and then more westerly as we get out just south of there on Saturday, upwards of 30-35 knots, but more importantly, winds are going to pull back around toward the southeast across the lower half of the Alaska Peninsula and increase to 35 to 40 knot gales. For Sunday, we anticipate 30 to 35 knot southeasterly winds here along the Alaska Peninsula, waves as high as 17 feet there south of Sand Point, 6 to 9 feet from the ice-free areas of Bristol Bay out to north of Cold Bay. And then here across the Aleutians, ahead of the low pressure that's going to cut up across the central Aleutians on up into the central Bering, ahead of it, southeast to south winds, 40 to 45 knot gales, some storm force gusts certainly possible, waves as high as 25 feet between Atka and Nikolsky. And then on Sunday, we expect those winds to not be quite as strong, but still overall, once you get above the surface, winds are still going to continue from the south. But we're looking at southeast gales, 35 knots, eastern Aleutians falling off to southwest winds to 20 knots, central Aleutians, and then west-northwest, 25 to 30 knots west of Adak. Along the southwest coast, 40 knot southeast to south gales, as high as 45 knots there around St. Paul, St. George, where waves both at St. Matthew and St. George and ice-free areas there will be around 20 feet. But this component, southeast to south winds, will try to pull some of that shore-fast ice away. Just look for fluctuating water levels as a result of that. And then on Sunday, winds continue 30 knots there and through Norton Sound, as high as 40 knots around Nunavik Island and out towards St. Matthew. So the ice will have a tendency to shift a little bit further north, maybe a little west, but otherwise still the potential for some of that shore-fast ice to be pulled away, especially here along areas of the northwest coast, along the Chukchi Sea coastline, Point Hope, southward through the Bering Strait. Look for southeast to south gales to 40 knots. And on Sunday, that will continue in the lower Chukchi Sea down through the Bering Strait, 35 to 40 knots southeasterly gales. Winds not quite as strong along the far northern Arctic coast. Look for winds out of the east-southeast at 25 knots up that way. So here's the low late tonight, early Saturday morning, initial low off the Russian coast. Here's the next low that rides northward. Ahead of it, strong southeast to south flow along the west side of the state will continue not just Saturday but into Sunday with blizzard conditions along areas of the west coast.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.